What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
Mark, it's great to have you here on the Learning Leader Show, especially a fellow Elk. I think the only other fellow Elks, my younger brother AJ and the great Kirk Herbstreit. So you're the third, man. Thanks for doing this.
Are you kidding? Thank you. Yeah, the great Kirk Herbstreit, and the even greater Ryan Hawk. So it's a pleasure. It's a true honor. I'm serious.
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, I want to set the stage. We're going to jump right into, I think, a really cool moment in your life. So the date, it's May 25th, 2015. You're a fighter pilot in the Air National Guard. You're sitting alert at your base when the alarm goes off. And within a few minutes, your flight leader, I think his call sign is Bishop, and you are approaching the speed of sound in each of your F-15 fighter jets off the East Coast, and you're looking for the Air France Flight 22 that took off from Paris bound for New York City. Now, Mark, why were you doing this, and what happened next?
Perfect setup. So why I was doing it right now, all across the country, mainly along the coasts, we have men and women sitting alert at their bases, ready to scramble fighter jets at a moment's notice. And of course, the reason can range from, some small aircraft has penetrated the protected airspace over the president. That's pretty common, all the way up to something like what happened with me, which is a commercial airliner departing de Gaulle Airport in Paris, bound for New York City. Someone called in a threat saying there was a chemical bomb on board this commercial airliner, Air France Flight 22. So our alarm goes off. I'm sitting there watching TV, doing who knows what. In my flight suit, we run out to the jets, power them up. Great ground team has us airborne within mere minutes, and we're blasting off the East Coast. Speed of sound, trying to find this Air France jet to see what's going on. So that's what got us there over the Atlantic at 700 miles an hour.
So was part of your mission did they tell you, hey, you might have to shoot this thing down?
So everyone knows that as you're a new fighter pilot, if you join the mission of alert, or frankly, even if you're based overseas in sort of that frontline combat scenario, you might be called upon it. I think after 9/11, everyone in the Air Force, Navy, anyone in combat aviation has recognized there could be a time when the ultimate bad news, terrible tragedy could happen, which is to potentially take lives in order to save lives, maybe saving thousands or more. So it was always in the back of our minds, certainly, yes. And then here is a scenario, it's pretty rare, Ryan, where, no kidding, airborne with live weapons could have happened.
So what happened?
So we get there. Thankfully, I think in the back of our minds, the healthy skepticism kicks in. You go, it's probably a false threat, but you never know, of course. So we take it very seriously. The entire, national defense structure took it seriously. Law enforcement, from Secret Service to local police to the U.S. Air Force, recognized this could be a serious catastrophe. But we get there, we intercept the airliner, and we're basically shadowing it. So no one on board knows we're there. We're behind it, ready to take action if we get the call from the president to shoot it down. So we're watching it.
Wait, did the pilot of the plane know you were there?
I do not think so. They never would have seen us the way we got there.
Okay.
I don't know what air traffic control told the pilots of Air France, but I would not think so. But I don't know, Ryan. Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, so
we're there watching, and at this point, we're to be quite blunt, we're the eyes and ears for the president, and if need be, the ones that would fire a missile. But it's going to be the president's decision. They monitored the flight. We were watching for any abnormal behavior, and I think it was deemed as a false threat. So we were able to escort it, shadow it into, I think it was landed at JFK, out on Long Island, and we went back home.
Wow. So how do you practice for something like that? I mean, do you go up and shoot a missile at something? I mean, how do you literally practice for something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mean, the nice thing is that I think should give everyone solace is that at least in the U.S. Air Force and our European allies and most of our allies across the world, highly trained to a T. And I make the case that, a U.S. Air Force fighter squadron's maybe the best team on earth for lots of reasons, which we can get into, but highly trained, but we're trained in all kinds of scenarios. And the nice thing is, whether it's a commercial airliner, small airplane, enemy fighter jet, the tactics, the way you prepare mentally, the skill you have over your aircraft, your fighter jet, it's more or less the same. And so whatever the mission is, it can vary day to day. You're ready to go, and it all comes back to those years and years, and it is truly years of training and preparation to get there.
Well, I'm just wondering about the emotion. Like, how do you take the emotion of thinking, like, I may shoot a commercial airliner? Now, you're obviously hoping, you're skeptical, like, this hopefully is a hoax. We think it's a hoax. At least that's your hope.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
you're also like, I might have to shoot this thing down in order to save other lives. I mean, I can't even imagine how that would feel. I've never experienced anything remotely close to that.
Others that have been in a situation like mine, I think I would probably all say that you do a good job of compartmentalizing it. It's effectively a mission, but no doubt about it. I remember thinking, how do I describe it, Ryan? It's like my whole life and all of the training, the years of preparation have come up to this moment. Don't mess it up. And I think there's always just do it right. Just do it with competence.
Yeah.
And if the call came to do something that was at the highest stakes imaginable, there's a bit of trust in the system, recognizing that no one would make that decision unless it was absolutely an imperative. And then also recognizing I'm going to do the right thing and I'm going to do it the best I can. And it will weigh on me forever. But the alternative was even worse, making a mistake or not taking action when action needs to be taken. And I would say that probably ports itself over to all facets of the military. No matter what one does, you get in these situations, and they're very rare, and you think, gosh, everything I have done my entire life, all the training, all even thinking of the times we're in middle school and high school and we've developed and grown as human beings, everything is sort of leading to this moment. It's so high stakes. The pressure is intense. I'm just going to do it right. I'm just going to do my job right. Trust the training, trust the systems that are out there to make the right call. So that's always there. And I think that helps us able to get through these very, stressful and challenging moments.
You said an American fighter squadron is the most effective team on the planet. That's a really big statement. What do American fighter squadrons do to become the most effective team on the planet?
Yeah, I think it is a bold statement. I even had someone, because I've made that claim before, and I've tried to describe basically why do I think that? And I had one person say something to the effect of, oh gosh, you lost me at that one, because it's just sort of that classic cocky fighter pilot. Mm-hmm. And then I recognized they actually weren't listening to me, because one of the key points I try to make is that, unlike what we see in Top Gun, the people that are part of those groups and teams in the fighter squadrons, cockiness is absolutely unacceptable. It is not there. There's confidence, certainly, but the idea of feeling like you're somehow better than others, that true cockiness in the most classic case, is actively, you're not allowed. You cannot be that way. You're just not going to function effectively. So that humility piece, which I know you've had so many great folks on your show talking about humility and how important it is, that is part and parcel with a fighter squadron. I mean, that's one piece of it. So I think that going into it and saying that the actual humility as an individual, the humbleness that we can exude when we're firing on all cylinders and doing a great job as a team, it's a virtuous cycle. So that's a big piece of it. There's lots of great teams. You've talked with people that are leading amazing teams all over the world, day in and day out. I think some of the aspects that make an Air Force fighter squadron really noteworthy, things that we've talked about before, and you've had folks talk about, not only that humility piece, but the idea that when you make a mistake, which we all do, and we actually make them quite constantly, we talk about it, we elevate the mistake, we diagnose why it happened, what are all those factors, how do we prevent mistakes in the future? In the Air Force, we call it a debrief. Other groups call it all kinds of things, hot washes, after action reports, you name it. For us, it's taken to an elite level. I've talked about before, you might practice and do something that's a 10-minute mission that you might spend days and days discussing, picking apart in the most fine tooth comb detail imaginable. And it just lets us hone in and get better and better and better. So a couple kind of off the cuff reasons that I think we're amazing teams. Last kind of thought on it, Ryan, the thing that I try to stress to folks also is that we defy the expectations and stereotypes. I think a lot of times we'll imagine that it's individuals who are just incredible individuals. And that's true to a degree. But what really makes it work is when you come in and recognize that as an individual, I have strengths and I have weaknesses, and what we're going to do is we're going to gel as a team. And it's a team focus from the get-go. I mean, in a way, it's very analogous to sports teams, recognizing that you might be a fantastic athlete, a superstar, Pro Bowler. You're never going to, you need the entire team to succeed. So there's just a team focus from day one.
In your TEDx talk, you talked about leaders and followers. This is part of the culture, and this is part of what makes the team so great. And the fact that it's not a rank thing, because I think I'm not a military guy. I mean, I hold you guys in the highest of regard. I think if you listen with all the military people I've had on, the special forces people and all that, I just a step above the rest. I think outsiders, when they think of the military, you think of like the general speaking down to somebody who was a lower rank, and that whatever that person says, that's just the way it goes. However, when I watched your TEDx talk, that is not how the debriefs go. Apparently, the ranks almost don't even matter. Can you describe how you guys play the role of leaders and followers so well as how followers need to be great at that role, but also need to be great at being a leader, because it could happen at any moment?
Yeah. As soon as you were saying that, I thought back to your show with General Stanley McChrystal, and obviously a great book, Team of Teams, right? And they talk a bit about this. In a fighter squadron, it's the military, so of course it's still hierarchical. It's still command and control. There is a triangle of rank. It is obvious, and that has not changed. But what's unique about a fighter squadron as a subculture within the military is that even when you're brand new, you're a second lieutenant, you're an officer. All fighter pilots have to be officers. It's been that way for decades. You're a formal leader. You're an officer. You've gone through all that kind of stuff. You're a formal leader, but you might be brand new and an absolute follower in terms of your role in the squadron. But it could be the case, and it often happens when, as you get into positions a little bit later on, a little bit more experience under you, you might lead a mission, a training mission, let's say. And on your wing, your followers in this mission may be folks that are of higher rank than you, generals, let's say. And then when you get back into the debrief, if you were the one that was leading the mission, you are the leader regardless of the rank of the people in the room. And it may be the case, and it often happens, when someone that is a formal leader, or they're sort of in charge by way of the structure, because you were in charge of that mission, it's your responsibility to call them out and say, you've made mistakes, and let's diagnose and let's get into it. I mean, make no mistake, there's certainly respect that goes into it. You're not, it's professional, but it is very true. Where I, Mark, as Captain so-and-so, may look at a general who's an experienced fighter pilot of 30 years and say, this was you screwed this one up. This was bad. Wow. Let's dig in. Let's talk about this. And
how does that go? Like the ego in the general is removed. Like that's where the humility comes in. Because I'm thinking about this in the corporate world, where a manager is talking to a VP that either they report to or not. Yep. And they go, we just went on that sales call, and I brought you with me because we needed some executive support, and you screwed it up. And here's how. I mean, respectfully, right? But here's how. That, to my knowledge, I don't think I've ever seen that happen.
Yeah, I think of like Bridgewater, Radical Candor. There are certainly groups that are aiming for it. I think some do it really well. The first piece, just bluntly, is that general came up in the same environment, and so it's just known from day one. Normal. The subculture is you check your rank at the door. When you're talking about a mission, you're talking about what went right, what went wrong, as you're debriefing or diagnosing the past in order to learn for the future, one's position, their title, all of those things are irrelevant. I mean, that's how it should be anywhere.
Yes.
Organization, no matter the organization, no matter the circumstance and context, it is about the truth. It is about fact finding and then diagnosing and trying to rectify the facts. There's a piece that kind of ties into, what you've often had folks talk about as well, this notion of psychological safety. Harvard professor Amy Edmondson has talked a lot about it. The notion that you are going to thrive as an organization or as a team when you feel safe to raise a concern. And in fact, I think some of her data came from studying Navy flyers. But the idea that you can go to your boss, you can go to a colleague, you can go to anyone in the organization and say, something's messed up, I've got a concern, I've got a question. And not only is that tolerated, it's welcomed. It is part of learning. And that's the key essential function of what goes on differently in a fighter squadron compared to most places where it's all about the truth. Rank, hierarchy does not matter. We just check that at the door as we walk in.
If you were hired to advise a Fortune 100 company, and they're, Mark, loved your talk. I'm the leader of this group. I want to create a culture like you guys have as a fighter pilot. What are some ways you could implement this in the business world and because it feels like there's so much trust. There's so much, like, in order to get in this room, you got to be super impressive, right? Because a general's not going to listen to somebody far below them if, like the vetting process and just the ability to get in the room, the people are all, so there's a lot of trust involved. But let's say we want to take that in the business world. What are some ways you would do that, like right now?
The first thing I'd say is for managers, leaders, folks that are out there making decisions around how you reward your people, how you incentivize certain behaviors, observable actions and observable behaviors. The thing you do is that when someone asks a hard question or raises a concern or does something, frankly, that may sort of rattle the cages a bit, reward that. Mm-hmm. Talk about it, elevate it, and say, Samantha, great job calling us out in this meeting. That's exactly what we need, and truly reward it verbally, whatever the case may be, whatever incentives you have. Mohammed, that is exactly what we need. You've raised the hard question. You're challenging us. That is not just what we say we want to do, but we're seeing it in action. We're talking about it. That will take time, but over time, you'll see that folks are going to recognize what gets rewarded, what gets elevated and talked about, or what's sort of suppressed a little bit, or maybe kind of, there's a lot of leaders out there who will say, we want critical thinking. We want you to ask the hard questions. But as soon as someone raises a hand and says, well, why are we doing it this way? The return is, even just tone or facial expression is, why are you asking that question? That's not how we work. You've got to genuinely want it, incentivize it, and make it happen. That's kind of that low-hanging fruit. You can do it tomorrow, in a meeting, in your Zoom calls with your team, rewarding those who ask hard questions. It'll take time, but that's something you can do to get there. The other piece I'd say is, as a leader, you're modeling the things that you want to see others do. So if you're a leader, are you asking hard questions of other leaders who may be, quote unquote, above you in your organization? Mm. Now, that can be risky. I'll be blunt with you, right? Because do you know what the reaction is going to be from that leader? But if you feel confident, if you feel like you're in the right space, you're trying to create the subculture that you want, you're going to have to model that. If you don't, people are just going to recognize, well, Mark is saying one thing, but he's not really doing it when where the rubber meets the road.
One of the things you said is we love leadership, and you could stack the books written about leadership up all the way to the moon and back, right? I think you made it up, but it was a good joke. Got a good pop from the crowd. But we've completely forgotten about the lost art of followership. And this is what I want to focus on as well, is some of the best leaders in history were amazing followers. You can do the research. It's out there, but we never talk about that. We don't be like, hey, be a great follower. Like, it just doesn't happen. Like, I think about one of my high school football coaches, who Ron Ullery. You probably had him for math as a math teacher back at Centerville High School. Every offseason, Coach Ullery would go to study on college campuses of the people. Like, he actually went to Air Force Academy because we ran the same offense as Air Force Academy, where you went to college. And they would fly out west, and they would spend weeks with those guys, and he'd come back with piles of notes. He was following, right, being a follow in order to lead us. So I think great leaders understand when to follow and that they need to be good followers. Can you share more about how you guys did this within a fighter squadron, as well as how you could do it outside of that?
Yep, I love it. So followership, the first thing I'd say is I think we need to take that term back, follower. It's just as much a part of leadership as anything else, because when you think about all of the great definitions that exist out there of what a leader means, the only one that I've ever found that resonates completely or covers every imaginable circumstance is a leader is simply someone who has followers. So you can't talk about leaders without the counterpoint, right? The other piece of that duality, if you will. And to your point, Ryan, you said it, every leader is a follower.
Yeah.
So people who are listening to this show, they're trying to build their leadership skills. They're trying to learn. All of us follow every day. General Stanley McChrystal, 4-star general, followed others. Mm-hmm. He didn't only follow the president. He also followed some of his junior staff. He listened and learned from them. He served them. I mean, it goes both ways. It's a constant two-way street. But I think what's happened is often we've thought of that term follower, and we've made it a negative in society, right? We've said, oh, well, I don't just want to be a follower. I want to be a leader. That's something to aspire to. Fine, but recognizing that you should never lose or forget what it means to follow effectively. That's going to make you a better leader, and vice versa. So that's the first thing that I would say, just kind of from a broad strokes perspective. In a fighter squadron, we talked about the power of the debrief. A follower is going to have leadership roles, and again, vice versa. The other piece is, as you're flying a mission, let's say, you recognize that no matter your role in that mission, you've got facets that in this 10-second span or this 30-second span, I'm going to have to do something that's going to lead. In this other 30-second span, I'm going to take the someone else is going to take the lead on what's happening. You're kind of constantly code shifting. Now, how does that apply to, say, nonprofits or the business world? No matter who you are, we all have gaps in our knowledge, right? We still need to learn new things. And where you've got that gap and you've identified, maybe I'm a great leader of people. I understand the customer, but I'm not great with finance. Right? It's just not my strength. You've got to take a step back, be humble, recognize that's not your strength. Those that know about it, give them the keys to the car, give them the power, and say, I'm following you. I'm learning from you. You've got this. Tell me what to do. Advise me. Help me understand. And that kind of humility, which is part of learning. Again, the best leaders are doing that every day. But it is following. Yeah. And I just feel like we forget about that quite a bit.
What about this idea of being a wingman, right? This is a real thing. You are a wingman, but using it both really, as you do, as well as kind of as an analogy outside of it. But can you describe, we hear that term. I know what that term means. I think of Maverick. I'm not leaving my wingman, because he made the mistake earlier in the movie. They both got killed, right? So, or I think it was training mission, obviously. But that kind of moment, I'm not leaving him, right? What is the definition of a wingman in your world as a flyer, as well as outside of it?
Yeah. I was going to say, so like I talked about that in my TED Talk, that in the Air Force, we have an actual term for in a flying follower, which is a wingman. Of course, it's a gendered term. Back in the day, only men were fighter pilots. Thankfully, now it's inclusive. It's opened up, but we still have the term. But a wingman is a follower. I mean, that is just the definition. But what's nice about it is the very first thing that you learn when you're flying high performance aircraft, so supersonic capable or high speed, high G turning, fighter jets or trainers. One of the first skills you learn is how to fly close to your flight lead. And it's truly, you're tucked in where the space between your wingtips is 3 feet, and you're flying hundreds of miles an hour. And it's stressful, Wild. But it's a skill set in terms of controlling your jet, right? Well, as a leader, your job is to look ahead, navigate your aircraft. Maybe you're flying the mission, and that there's someone else who may be very new, inexperienced, and they're 3 feet away from you. If they make a mistake, it's instant tragedy. And unfortunately, it can happen. It does sometimes happen. It's thankfully rare, but the reason it's rare is because the only way that they got in a position where they're on your wing is that they've earned it. They've earned it by way of the milestones that they've accomplished in training. They earn their wings on their chest. They've demonstrated competency in these skills, and you just don't have to worry about them. And I think the same thing can apply in any organization, where you need to make sure that your processes, your systems, are that when someone is put in a position of where trust must be earned, it's a critical position. You've got to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they've earned that. That's not to say we don't stretch or push people maybe outside of their comfort zone, but do it in a safe space. Like, do it kind of in that sandbox where they can fail, make a mistake, and it's not going to cause a problem. But you've got to be confident that by the time your follower gets to a position where they're going to impact your organization, they're going to impact your sales, your customer, whatever it is, you're supremely and sublimely confident in their ability to do it. They've demonstrated that credibility.
One of the best sales managers that I worked, I never worked for him, but he was in the same building as me. His name's Jeff Weaver, also a military guy. And Weaver was fanatic. I mean, his team was always in that training room. He made those training rooms really hard, making sales calls. They were doing mock calls. They were doing real calls. And they were fanatical about this. And Weaver became known as the best sales manager in the building. And people wanted to be on his team, but people were also a little scared because they knew the practice was going to be so just relentless, like all the time in between. And so some were scared, but the best of the best wanted to go there. You guys practice. That's one way you earn trust. That's one way you do it. Repetition, whatever you do, repetition over and over and over is what made you so good. Can you share more about how much you practiced and how that helped you so much?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the repetition piece is there. I mean, without a doubt, right now, across the military, the vast majority of anyone's time, no matter what their role is, even special forces, even fighter squadrons, they're practicing, they're training, and they're training with their team. Yeah, they're trying scenarios out, but they're given the permission to fail. And of course, we know how much we learn from mistakes and failures. They're given the permission to fail in training so that they can succeed when it's real world. Now, I'll be honest, that can be hard to replicate a little bit when it comes to kind of crossing that Rubicon into private sector, other organizations. How do you practice with your sales team rather than actually interacting with customers or capturing new opportunities? I mean, you've got to find a way, but there are creative ways you can do it. Sure. But the idea is that over time, well, I'll put it this way, and you've had other folks talking about, creating learning organizations. So what does that mean? Let's say Rachel's your best salesperson. However you define it, doesn't matter what the role is, but they may not have a chance to, quote unquote, practice like we would in a fighter squadron. But let's say Rachel makes a mistake. Now, is she talking about that with the rest of the entire team? Sometimes they're incentivized not to, right? Mm-hmm. It can kind of be one-on-one combat a little bit within sales teams and other organizations, quite frankly. But as a leader of that organization, you've got to find a way that Rachel will be incentivized and want to share her lessons learned with the rest of the team, knowing that she's going to get that as, it's going to be reciprocated in the future. Others are going to make mistakes. Others are going to have opportunities to learn and evangelize their lessons back to Rachel. And you as a leader need to recognize, I'm cultivating that subculture. I'm cultivating those social norms on ensuring that everyone wants to do that. And you eventually kind of get to this tipping point where you almost, I felt it, flying jets, you almost get excited about someone pointing out your mistakes because you made them. And now you're going to have someone else that's going to help you understand and help learn from them.
I mean, doesn't it feel good? This is weird, but it's true. I think of specific moments in my career where someone had the guts to pull me aside, sometimes a boss, sometimes not, and say, in that meeting yesterday, here is exactly what you did. And I wasn't even fully aware of it. I was like, wow, I mean, thank you so much. It did sting. It hurt briefly, right? Because they're telling me I messed up. But to me, I gain a whole new level of respect. I value that person. I really want them around if they're willing, because the person who's like, hey man, you killed it, great job, like every time, yeah, it does temporarily feel good, but I'm not really getting better longer term. Like, well, what didn't I do well? I think that's how you become a value added person, is you pay close attention to figure out what is it that the person excelled at and then where they didn't. We all mess up all the time, as you said. That's like the leader that we want to be.
I was thinking earlier, as I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to talk about. One of the things I think fighter squadrons do well is creating a culture where it's not just the debrief of lessons learned from a mission. Let's say we're actually taught how to receive feedback, and receiving feedback is an absolute skill. It's an art. Just gave a receiving feedback course in the private sector. At my firm Mile 2, and talked about some of these skill sets and behaviors and mindsets that you can have to be good at receiving feedback. Great book out there. Thanks for the feedback. That is written by 2 Harvard law professors. They're negotiation experts, and they talk about how there's different styles of feedback. You know, there's telling Ryan, hey, great job on the podcast. There is evaluation. Here's where I think it was good, poor, etc. And there's different modes. There's also coaching, and they're kind of 3 independent, but we often mistake them. So I might tell you, you know, Ryan, good job on the podcast because I love it. It's fun to listen to. I learn every time. But you might think that I'm just giving you an evaluation, and you go, great, it's perfect. Nothing to improve here. But in reality, I'm just giving you an accolade.
Yeah.
Likewise, if someone sits down with you and they're saying, here's the things that I think you can improve on, you know, this, that, or the other thing. And if you're just in the mindset or the mood of just receiving some form of an accolade, it stings, it hurts, because you're just looking for a, hey, good job.
Yeah.
Now, as a leader, you need to be conscientious of what kind of feedback you're trying to give. But here's the thing, as the follower, as the one receiving feedback, you've got to recognize, what do I need in the moment, and ask for it explicitly. Now, in a fighter squadron, we'll have that all the time. We'll get sort of those, you know, those accolade appreciation style feedbacks. You get medals, you get awards, you get, you know, hey, wingman of the quarter, whatever it is. But day to day, you're also getting evaluation and coaching, and you know what kind it is in that moment. It's clear, and we've baked it into our processes and our cultural norms. And most places, that's not the way it is at all. We mistake what kind of feedback we're getting at any given time.
I think of too, as a manager, when I've asked for feedback from reps, so people who work for me on the org chart, it's so critical how you respond to it. The natural tendency for most of us is to get defensive. Give me feedback. They tell me something that I messed up, and it's like, well, I did it because, but you don't understand, you know, as opposed to genuinely thanking them. So I've also been in that position where I was asked to give feedback, and trying to help them, I would give them critical feedback that I thought was true, was real. And if they immediately go to defensiveness or blaming someone else or explaining it away, what they are teaching me is, you don't want feedback. You said you did, but you don't. Maybe you said it because it sounded good, but you don't. And that is training me as the feedback giver to not really give you real feedback the next time, because you're proving. So to me as a leader, it's so critical that especially when we ask for it, but even if you don't ask for it, really be prepared to take it, even if you don't agree with it at all, because you're training the person giving you feedback whether you can take it or not. And as leaders, we have to be willing to take feedback if we want to get better. And I think part that I've definitely messed up and have worked to try to get better at, because it's a natural thing for us to be like, well, no, man, what are you talking about? You know, I think that's a really key part of receiving feedback.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a lifetime skill that you can cultivate. And the reason you feel that, same that I do, is because we're human beings. And sort of taking the one of the key messages that was out of that book, thanks to the feedback, is the reason it's so hard to do successfully as receiving feedback is because it lies at the intersection of 2 competing needs as humans. The one need is that we want to learn and grow and get better. We're listening to Ryan Hawk and his guests because that's what we want to do. At the same time, we have a human need to feel loved and respected and valued for exactly who we are. And how you reconcile that natural tension is really tough. And it, like you said, I mean, we've all stumbled on that. We naturally feel, as soon, you know, if you walked up to me and go, "Hey, Mark, I've got some feedback for you," my fight or flight kind of kicks in a little bit. I'm getting a bit nervous. What's he going to say? This is going to make me, you know, question my self-worth, all that kind of stuff. That's normal. People should feel okay with that. If they feel that, it's because they're alive, right? Yeah. Congrats, you're living, you're a human being. But what we can do is really try to separate the message from the sender. We can tell ourselves that no matter what the person tells me, I have the power over choosing what I'm going to do with that information. Right. And there are times that we've all received feedback that quite frankly is invalid. It's just not accurate. And instead of looking for that all the time as someone's giving you feedback, what they'll call fault finding. You know, someone's about to give you feedback. You're kind of stepping back and going, all right, where is this going to be BS? I know there's going to be something that's wrong about this. I'm great. I know it. It's good to be self-confident, but don't fault find. Instead, be open to what they're going to say. You have the power to choose what you're going to do with that information. One piece that I think is really important, we don't talk about it enough, and I didn't get into it, frankly, in my internal course that I just did. What do you do if you question the credibility of the person giving you feedback? This happens all the time. And I think there's kind of two things that you can do as a leader of organizations, as a receiver of feedback. It doesn't matter. You're intentionally trying to separate the message from the messenger. You've just got to separate the two. But also, as a leader of an organization, are you ensuring that the people who are giving feedback are going to be deemed credible? Yeah. And I talked about that a bit earlier of, you know, that credibility piece of ensuring that, you know, just like if you're on the wing of a fighter jet, I trust that wingman has earned their keep and they're there for a reason. They've demonstrated competency. Are people that are in your organization demonstrating at least the minimum what you need by way of competency? And if they're not, they shouldn't be. They need to be trained, they need to be skilled before they're put in a place of interacting. That credibility piece is absolutely critical. I have a chance, I get to study under Amanda Goodall. She is a professor at Bayes Business School, City, University of London. She's my PhD supervisor. She has a book coming up, and it's called Credible. And it's the power of having people who lead that are deemed experts in their field. And a lot of interesting research that she's done. What's, I think, fascinating, we can kind of make these analogies to sports a little bit. And we often think about the counter examples that should almost be exceptions that prove the rule. Just because you're a great, cricket player does not mean you're necessarily going to be the best cricket coach. Right. But on average, being a great cricket player will, again, on average, make you a better coach than someone who's not a good cricket player, right? So there is something about just demonstrating expertise and being credible in the eyes of your followers that remains really important.
I think of the speed of trust from the Coveys, and the two parts of trust are character and competence, right? And I think they're both equally important. In that second part, though, you can't just be a high character person, right? And you can't just be a competent person. I think it takes both of those in order to build some trust, and that is a big element too of giving feedback. It's this person of competence. I mean, it's in the football world, we say this all the time. Does that coach know anything? I mean, that's kind of it's just a very off the cuff phrase. Does he actually know what he's talking about? And some are like, no, he doesn't, or absolutely, and that's why we're listening, and that's why it's going to pay attention. But I think that's big. Mark, you've spent the bulk of your life surrounded by some of the highest caliber leaders in the world. They've sustained excellence, and that's a key theme that I study over the course of 500 plus of these episodes. I'm curious, from your perspective and the people you've studied, what have you found to be some of the commonalities among leaders who have sustained excellence over an extended period of time?
Yeah, good question. I thought about this too, because you do talk about this. I feel like in every episode, it's sustained excellence, and that's a really hard thing to do. I mean, for one, I guess I'd say, just kind of off the cuff, we should all give ourselves grace if we stumble. I mean, I feel like I've been very fortunate, very privileged and lucky. And I think, I've been in, military aviation and other places for 20 plus years, which when you think of it is bananas, because military aviation as a thing has only been around for 105 years or so. But there are times that I haven't been excellent. I feel like, gosh, that was a moment or a period where I was kind of falling a bit. So for one, you've got to give yourself that grace. Because we're all there. We're all human. So we stumble. Sustained excellence to me is a little bit about pace. And they often warn, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Part of what you need to do as an individual is recognize when you need a switch of contexts or environments, because you're either approaching burnout or you're recognizing you've got some serious gaps in your skills or abilities that you need to address. And you've got to make some sort of a change in your life. Now that can range from, taking a course in terms of learning a skill, let's say finance, all the way up to I'm gonna do a new gig for 3 years. I'm gonna leave this role and kind of do something else because I'm gonna be learning. I'm gonna have a chance to refresh a little bit. And I think that's part of why we see in organizations within jobs, we see much more movement than we used to. Obviously, things like the lack of retirement plans is an impact, and the labor market and all that kind of stuff and all the rest of it. But also, I think people are craving this idea that every 3, 4, 5 years, if I go to a new role, be it with a new employer or otherwise, I'm going to have some really cool, fresh experiences that keeps me excited and keep me jazzed in terms of learning. Now, how can you leverage that in an organization so people don't feel that they must leave your organization? Do you have the opportunity to give them new experiences? Totally let them code shift into something else. For our firm, we tell folks, let's say you're a software engineer, but you have a hankering for some design, some UX, UI, user experience, user interface. We want you to be able to explore that. And that might be your next role. And those are two separate professions. They overlap, of course, but that's a new job. But we want to make it so that you can kind of move back and forth with a bit of fluidity. And I think that's going to become more and more important over time.
You teach at University of Dayton. You're teaching at your company, Mile 2. You're at your head of learning and development for their internal employees, which is a really cool job. I give Mile 2 huge credit. 120 employees, I think I read. A lot of companies that size probably don't hire a learning and development person. It shows to me, without knowing the company at all, that they really value learning and development, because I'm sure you're not cheap. So I'm curious, though. I found being put in the position of being a teacher is one of the greatest learning tools in the world. You got to get very clear on what you believe before you stand up in front of a group and say it. And the act, especially a guy like you, who's, I would imagine, is also a prep guy, you got to do a lot of prep. Like, what do I think about this topic? I'm teaching a course on feedback. Well, I got to really become a master on it before I teach it. What are some of the greatest learnings you've picked up in your role as a teacher, whether it's at UD you're teaching or within Mile 2 teaching the leaders there?
You said something that reminded me of, I think, what my favorite episode of yours is, and I want to get his name right, so apologies to him if I don't. Jay Hennessy, I want to say he's the Cleveland Guardians.
Navy SEAL, yeah.
Navy SEAL, learning and development. I listened to that and I thought, oh my gosh, this is my jam. I love it.
That's what he's doing for the Cleveland Guardians baseball team. Yeah.
I loved it. It was just right up my alley. He said something. I think it was Jay. I think he said something that if you're teaching, if you're talking, you're the one learning. And so the idea that, and
which
I think we see
the opposite of what most people say. Hey, you have one mouth and two ears. Keep your mouth shut. That's when you learn. I never learn when I talk. I say the opposite. Our mutual friend, Lance Salyers, he helps me with a lot of writing and speaking at times. He helped you with your TED Talk. I'll tell him, I need to talk this thing out, man, because we're trying to get clear on a chapter or something for a book. I need to talk this out to figure out what I actually think. And so I learned through the process of preparing for the meeting, then having the meeting and talking it out. I think that's similar.
This is what maybe a challenge is. It runs a little bit counter to what I'm seeing or hearing more, certainly in the private sector around meetings. There is a push, and I get it, rightfully so in most contexts, of meetings must have clear agendas. It needs to be from this 10 minutes, we're talking about this. It's a bit of a laundry list, but there's a value of just getting in a virtual or literal physical room and just talking things out. Me and Ryan sitting in a room. Here's my thought on this. I'm sort of top of brain. trying to formulate my thoughts, you're able to kind of pick apart and go, that doesn't resonate. That doesn't make sense there. There's massive value in that. And I feel like we're moving a little bit away from it. So that is part and parcel with learning, is being able to talk that through. On the kind of flip side, the idea of, if you're not the one talking, you're not the one learning. I mean, honestly, sometimes it bites me too. I look back and I think, gosh, I wish I would have had a bit more interactivity to the course I gave. It was a bit more of kind of the lecture style. I was doing the talking. I think it was good, but the reason, and to your question earlier, what can you do? Like, what have I learned? Again, you kind of hit the nail on the head. If I'm going to go and I'm going to earn the trust of the people that I'm talking to, get them to get something out of what I'm saying, be it a student in a university setting or leaders in a corporate setting or whatever, I need to do, there's no way to kind of short shrift it. I need to do deep research. I need to know that what I'm about to say is backed by data, that it's not just, it is out there, that has been tested to some degree. There's credibility behind the information. That's going to lead to credibility in their perception of me. I've said that word now, how many times have I said credibility? Someone's going to call me out on it, but it's just so part and parcel for what we're going to be able to do. So whether I'm teaching in class, I think the very first thing I do is, well, what do I know about this topic from experience, knowledge, and so forth? And what do I not know about this topic? Because no matter what the topic is, there's going to be a lot I don't know. And how do I fill those gaps? And what's kind of my method of learning around recognizing what my gaps are, filling them? Am I looking at other leaders to give me some insights and expectations? Am I going to source data, looking at actual peer-reviewed journals and so on and so forth, obviously kind of in an academic setting. But I've got to be sort of self-aware. And I think that self-awareness is that first key step in being a good teacher and learner as it follows.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You talk about that in your academy. The very first step, if I understand it correctly, is it's a self-awareness piece.
Absolutely.
And thumbs up to you, because most places don't start there. It's about, here's what a leader is. Here's how you demonstrate leadership characteristics. I say, no. Let's pump the brakes. Step one of being an effective leader is knowing yourself.
It's funny. Someone will say, hey, will you come out and kind of build a leadership development program for our company with our 40 managers? And I'll focus so much time on leading yourself first, on all of the kind of personal excellence elements of it. They're like, when are we going to get to the leading the team stuff? I go, well, if you don't get this first part right, the second part has no chance, So we always start there. I mean, of holding the mirror up very close and getting really real with what you're about, what you know, what you believe, your awareness of self, your strengths, your weaknesses, what you need to work on before we're going to get into the team stuff. So I think it kind of has to go in that order. You're also probably a guy that a lot of people earlier in their career want to talk to because of what you've built for yourself, and you're still approaching your prime, which is pretty cool. When you think of somebody who's like 24, 25, they've graduated college and they want to leave a positive dent in the world, right? They want to do good, but they're not really sure. I have a meeting actually with somebody like this next week, so I'm already thinking about it. What are some general pieces of life/career advice you give to that person?
I've said the word strengths earlier, and you've had guests on that talk about the idea of being strengths based and that, but I maybe double down on it a bit, because I didn't do it when I was, in my early 20s, let's say. What are you naturally good at? To me, a strength, I'm kind of using the Marcus Buckingham definition, is it's something you're good at, but it's also something that you enjoy doing. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of times we forget that second piece. We all have things that we're good at, but it's something that we frankly are ambivalent towards, or maybe we don't even enjoy doing it. But we think, well, that strength is marketable. I need to focus on that and go down that route. And I'd say, yes, don't forget about that. But also, if it's not giving you some bit of joy, I mean, what are you setting yourself up for? So if you're able to do, again, kind of starting with that self-reflection, self-awareness piece of, gosh, what do I really enjoy and what am I good at combined? And sort of letting that guide you a little bit and helping you sort of explore what's next, I think that would be really beneficial. Mm-hmm. So an example kind of from a fighter squadron point of view, we can all fly the plane. Like the actual flying of a fighter jet's frankly not that tough, but employing it as a weapon system, understanding the tactics, that's really hard. And it takes years to get really good. I was average, maybe below in some respects, but I knew I was above in other respects. And so I knew I would never be the best. And I didn't necessarily need to focus on what I was average about. But if I recognize a strength of mine that on this small team of maybe 4 or 6, I'm a bit good at this. I would let that guide me to how I want to create my self-identity, what I could be leveraged for on my team. And we all sort of naturally went that direction. And some people are good at X and some people are good at Y. And we don't all want to be the same. We want to really focus on our individual strengths. So that's, again, something that's kind of, I'd say a bit unique from a fighter squadron point of view. Whereas in the rest of the world, we often talk about being well-rounded. We talk about, filling, just, identifying weaknesses and filling them. And I think, yes, that's valuable, but also, what do you bring that's particularly unique to the table? And in your early 20s, I think that's when you're starting to kind of really figure that out.
It's like that Venn diagram, what you're good at, where it intersects with what you enjoy doing. And hopefully the third part is what the world needs. And you find that intersection of 3, which isn't the easiest thing. It takes reps at time. You got to try new stuff, experiment, right? Figure some things out. It's not the follow your passion advice, right? There's like a lot of combinations here because you can't just, right? Is it Chris Rock's joke? Yeah, follow your passion's great if they're hiring, So figuring out where that Venn diagram intersects of what you're good at, what you enjoy, and what the world needs. I think that's really good advice and super helpful. Mark, this is awesome, man. I appreciate it. I'd love to talk more now that we're both here, Ohio guys. I'm glad we got connected. I highly recommend listening or watching The Culture of a Fighter Squadron. That's Mark's TED Talk. Did it here in Dayton, home of the Wright brothers. It is an awesome, awesome talk. It's really good. It's 11 minutes and 20 seconds too. So you probably took an hour speech and was able to get it down to 11 minutes and absolutely killed, man. So huge props to you. I'd love to continue our dialogue as we both progress, man.
Ryan, thank you. I mean, your listeners right now, they're learning every day from you. I mean, you've put together something that's quite amazing. So tip of the hat to you, and it's a pleasure.